Preparing the live stream. All right. We should be good.
Okay.
All right. Take it away, Tracy.
Well, welcome everyone. It is Tuesday, June 13th. The time is 6:30. This is the Environmental Committee meeting for Community Board 10. Tonight's agenda is we have Stephanie Fox, please, or welcome Stephanie, providing a training on the New York City Climate Dashboard, followed by a discussion regarding the Department of Sanitation, New York City Department of Sanitation rule change impacting the placement of refuse and commercial businesses in containers. Sorry, I have allergies today. Excuse me. So Stephanie, would you like to begin?
Sure, thank you so much. Thank you all for having me today. As mentioned, my name is Stephanie Fox. I'm the Strategic Organizer for Climate and Environmental Justice here at the Office of the Comptroller. Got a couple of objectives tonight. First, to gain a better understanding of our office's approach and priorities when it comes to climate change. And two, to gain a working understanding of our climate dashboard. Started off, what's it called? A little about our office. Our office actually we take climate change very seriously. You know this because we have two different teams that work on climate issues. First up, we have the team that I work on, which is part of the climate team, which works in our policy bureau, which consists of me and Luis Young, who's our chief climate officer. Then we also have the Bureau of Asset Management and the ESG team, who focus on the financial side of things. I'm sure most of you know the bulk of what the Comptroller's office does is focus on managing the finances of our city, especially our pension. This team focuses on making sure that we proactively use our finances responsibly in a way that shepherds in a reasonable growth over the long term, and taking long-term growth and long-term risk into account. One of those long-term risks, of course, is climate change. We focus on the climate crisis from a couple of different fronts here. So as Chief Fiscal and Accountability Officer, the Comptroller is focused on managing long-term risks. The biggest long-term risk facing New York City as a series of islands that are low-hanging is climate change. It's going to impact many different aspects of our city, including our communities, our economy, our infrastructure, and of course, most importantly, our people. So what we aim to do is we shepherd in an equitable and just transition to a low-carbon economy and make sure that we're equipped for adapting to what there is to come. Now, as I mentioned, we focus on a couple different tools. Also, I do want to say that this is a pretty small group here, so usually I try to save questions to the end, but feel free to chime in as we're going on here. We a couple different tools that we use. One of the biggest things we do in my aspect of office work is in policy. So we conduct a research and analysis, we make policy recommendations. Some of you might have seen Cap the Credits in the presses a few months back as a policy report we put out about Local Law 97, advocating that we cap it's called energy credits for Local Law 97 to make sure people can't buy their way out of the Local Law 97. So we do things like that, put forward ideas, and also try to work within policy and rulemaking to have as much impact as possible. We also strategically organize. That's what I do. It's my job title. We do a couple different things. I try to serve as an advocate for the advocates. Work with community organizations, community boards, nonprofit groups, advocates groups, to basically bring them in and act as a trusted resource, and also trying to make sure that that voice is heard in our policy making here at the office. And we also do things like advocate for legislation. We use our platform to uplift community-based work, testified hearings, attend rallies. Of course, we also prudently manage our account risk with pension investments. We're working on achieving a net zero investment portfolio. 3 out of 5 of our pensions in New York City have signed on to a plan that we put forward, which is a net zero plan, which we're really excited about. We also helped our city divest from fossil fuel reserves, and we're working right now to invest proactively in climate change solutions. with a goal of 50 billion by 2035. And last but not least, we use our shareholder power to push companies to take bolder climate action. As a holder in large amounts of stock, we basically have the proxy votes for those pieces of stock, and we use them. And last but not least, we provide transparent and reliable information about climate risk spending and actions to New Yorkers. We do things like audits, and we release information about where our city is and is not prudently spending our hard-earned money. We do things like our 10 years after Sandy report, which was focused on rebuilding and resiliency projects after Hurricane Sandy, and showing people where that money has and has not been spent. And last but not least, we're doing things like the climate dashboard, which is what we're here to talk about today, which is basically a way, it's a portal to look at open data. I'll get more into that in a second. So the way that we came about the climate dashboard is we were looking at different ways that climate impacts our city. We're trying to find out ways to tie climate into some of the broader work we do here at the office. We know that climate change exacerbates underlying racial and economic inequalities and impacts every aspect of our city's work. We know there's racial disparities when it comes to climate impacts, and so we try to look at everything through a climate justice lens. And we're trying to also make sure that people have the tools to do that in their own work as well. So we're trying to provide information to make sure people can do that. This way they can look at things like this. You can compare these maps and you can see how our built environment impacts modern climate issues. For instance, the map over here. Map over here shows it's a map of redlining from the 1960s. You can see where banks did and did not invest and provide loans across our city. And over here, you can see our heat vulnerability index. This is from last year. And you can see there's a lot of overlap between what those things mean. Now, this kind of shows you how divestment from mostly communities of color and immigrant communities in this one side from the 1960s has continued to impact our built environment in such ways that it impacts how people are vulnerable to climate and vulnerable to heat in our city today. So we want to find ways to make information like this more clear to people and more accessible to people. So we came up with our climate dashboard. Now, what the climate dashboard is it's built on something called New York City Open Data. Has everyone here heard of Open Data? Yeah. So it's a portal that our city uses that basically allows people to see all the data that our city picks up, and kind of use that and analyze that. It's very cool. It's very useful if you have data analysis skills. Your average person doesn't know how to do Excel magic, doesn't really know how to do mapping, probably does not have a degree in GIS. So that information often is not very useful to people. So the goal of our climate dashboard is to take that data and make it and process it into usable ways so people can use that data in ways that impact their advocacy and their activism and their research. So let me take you into the climate dashboard. Go and look down here. All right, so here's our climate dashboard. So you can access it through here. You can go to our website, services for the public, New York City Climate Dashboard. And if you click that, it brings you to this page here. This is just a little introduction page. Nothing fancy. Tells you a little bit about the commitments that we've made as a city. Tells you a little bit about what climate change means for New York City. Talks about extreme heat, sea level rise, coastal storms, and rainstorms. Some of the biggest ways that climate will impact our city, which we map out in the coming pages. Now we've divided this up between energy, emissions, climate finance, resiliency, and feedback. We actually have a new section that's coming later this week, which is environmental quality, which I'll tell you a little bit more about a little bit later. But to start off, let's look at energy. So as I mentioned, the point of this is to provide transparency so people can use data. So we've pulled stuff from public data and public reports. When you land on this energy page, first thing you're going to see is our New York City power mix. Now, New York State as a whole has a pretty green grid. Unfortunately, most of that green energy is used upstate. Not much of it is able to get downstate to New York City. So when you plug into a wall in New York City, what you're mostly getting is you're getting dirty fuel. Overwhelmingly, that fuel is from gas. We do have a little bit of renewables, a little bit of hydro, a little bit of nuclear, but overwhelmingly, what we're getting is dirty energy. So our goal is to bring this down over the long term. There's a couple of different ways you can do that. One way we can do that is by building more solar power within our city. More solar power you bring into our city, the less dependent we are on gas on a daily basis. Our city has committed to installing 1,000 megawatts of rooftop solar over the course of the next decade by 2030. So one of the things we want to do is we want to make it transparent. Like, people often know that we make commitments, but it's hard to see where those commitments are from year to year, day to day. So what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that people can see how much solar we've installed in our city year to year. This way you can track how we're doing as a city. And you can also see over here how much more we need to do every year in order to stay on top of our goals. So you can see, we're not quite halfway there yet. We're trying to improve that. We've got a policy we're putting forward. Actually, we're working on a pilot right now called Public Solar New York, which I'm really excited to talk to you more about details once we get those details out. But we do know that we have a pilot coming very soon, which I'm very excited to tell you about soon. You can also look at emissions. So we've set a goal to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. It's very cool to say that. It's very cool to make that commitment, but it's a lot harder to show that what that means from year to year. So we put it into a chart. This data we've gleaned from different greenhouse gas inventories our city puts out. You can see from year to year how much emissions in total we have as a city. And you can see they're broken down by buildings, transportation, and waste. This way you can see exactly how we're doing year to year and how each individual sector is doing from year to year. And we actually break that down too by buildings, transportation, and waste. So you can see where that is actually more specifically coming from. For instance, you can see it broken down by residential, commercial, and manufacturing, separated out. These are all total. So this is from last year. So you can see that this represents these categories. So you can see where, how our different sectors within that sector are doing. And you can also see that broken down by where those emissions are coming from. You can see how much is coming from steam. For residential last year, it was 190,000 tons of carbon dioxide. You can see how much of that's coming from natural gas. A bulk of it for residential buildings are coming from gas. You can see how much is coming from electricity and how much is coming from fuel oil. And you can see that broken down for commercial and manufacturing as well. And we do break that down even further. And we can actually, you can see the differences between how we're doing from 2005 to last year. We break down how we're doing with steam, natural gas, different kinds of fuel oil. And we have that broken down for manufacturing and commercial as well. You can see that either a comparison directly or a percent change. I like the percent change way because you can see which way things are going. It's more clear, I believe. This is a very cool thing we have as well. Let me zoom in Bay Ridge. So this is a map. A local law 84 passed a few years ago required buildings to self-report their energy benchmarks, basically their Energy Star ratings. And all that information gets put into open data, and you can see individual buildings. Unfortunately, that they don't really show a map or anything like that. So what we wanted to do is we wanted people to be able to see exactly where these buildings are. So you can see that if you have a building down your street that's a red, that's a failing building, you can click on it. And when you click on it, you get information about it. You can see the property name, you can see what kind of building it is. You can see it's multifamily housing. You can see different things like if it's a whole property or if it's a partial property. You can see kind of what energy they're using. You can see the total greenhouse gas emissions, including direct and indirect Indirect is how much emissions they have based on things like electricity consumption. And you can see if they're using gas or oil or electricity. You can see how much can be cooled, yada, yada, yada. Basically, you can see a lot of detail about the buildings that are around your neighborhood. Now, what this allows you to do is it allows you to see specifically what buildings in your area need improvement. So it empowers people to be able to point to a problem, be like, that building right there is producing a lot of emissions. And you can say why. And you can see, you can apply pressure as well. We also have this broken down for transportation, as I mentioned, this part right here. You can see it broken down by different kinds of transportation. For instance, we have electricity for railways, diesel for railways, which is very small, solid waste on road, basically, garbage trucks, passenger cars, which of course make the bulk of our emissions in New York City from transportation, medium duty trucks, heavy duty trucks, and buses. You also see marine diesel, which if you're all familiar with the ferry, that's where that's mostly coming from. And jet fuel from aviation. Use a lot of that. You can see their totals. You can also see percent change over here. We also try to include other things like green transportation. We have a goal to develop at least 50 miles of bike lanes annually. So that's what this yellow line represents. You can see how much we're doing a year, so you can keep people honest and see how we're doing every year. And you also see how many of those bike lanes are protected versus unprotected. If any of you are cyclists around here, you know the big difference between the protected and the unprotected bike lanes. I'm actually right now getting a friend of mine onto a bike for the first time since she was a teenager, and it's really helpful to find a lot of these protected bike lanes because it's where she feels safest. And the more people feel safe biking, the more people will be able to bike. We also show bike parking spaces developed. It's easier to transfer to travel by bike when you have a place to put your bike. We're also tracking how many electric vehicles are on the road right now. It's about 1%, trying to grow that. And you can see how much of our fleet in New York City, or these are like New York City government vehicles. These are from the fleet that we own, are electric year to year, and how much we're adding on to that. And this is a map that shows various sustainable transportation infrastructure. Right now, what we have is bike routes and EV fleet station. These are like charging stations. So you can click on them and you can actually see what each bike lane is, where it is. You can see information about it. You see where they go, where they come from. Another cool thing is that all these maps we have a layer that's for environmental justice communities. So you can see specifically where infrastructure is being built and how that interacts with our environmental justice communities and upcoming environmental justice communities. So you can see you can apply that social justice lens to our infrastructure issues. We're trying to make this a thing you can actually apply to all the maps so you can see how they interact. And of course, waste. We're tracking organics participation. You can see that year over year here, separated by size of buildings and schools. And diversion rate by borough. We are unfortunately not doing great as a borough, but we are improving. Improving is one step to getting there. Manhattan right now is the gold standard, followed by Queens and Staten Island. I know you all want to beat Staten Island, so. Climate finance. This is also a pretty cool one. So our climate finance page tracks how we're doing our job here at the Comptroller's Office. We put forward net zero plans that say that we're going to get our pension investments from those 3 systems that are participating down to net zero by 2040. It's one thing for us to say that. It's a whole other thing for us to, 1, make a plan to do it, and 2, show people how we're doing along the way there. So we actually separate this out by the different, the different systems. So you can see how we're doing, how our plan will benchmark in the future, and how much further we'll have to go after that. Let me go to TRS, because TRS is my favorite pension system, because they're doing the best. Although I'm technically a member of the NYSERS one, so I should probably track that one more closely. So TRS, you can see this is how we've done so far. Now, how we done so far mostly has to do with all of the fossil fuel reserves that we have already divested from. So that brought us from 100% down to 75%, to 73%. Now, that's a pretty significant drop, although we have a good amount to go. So our net zero plan sets two goals. It sets us an interim goal of 2025 and then 2030. So our plan, it goes into 2030 for a reason. It's one thing to put forward a plan that goes beyond that. However, it's harder to keep track of a plan that you are no longer in office for. So we try to be realistic and stick to years that we have control over. So our plan by 2030, if we do continue going as we are, and we will report on that as we go year to year, will take us to 41% by 2030. And this represents what we'll have to do after that. We also have total emissions broken down by system. And we have that broken down by scopes 1 and 2 emissions and scope 3 emissions. Does anyone here know what scope 3 emissions are? Daniel, I see you raising your hand. Why don't you go ahead and say it?
I don't know. I was going to be put on the spot. Oh, geez, I hope I'm right now. Scope 3 emissions are, I think, basically all of the emissions that are sort of generated by inputs into a process. So, for example, you know, if I'm a car manufacturer, my scope 3 emissions are the emissions that result from manufacturing the tires on the car.
Yeah, that's about it. So yeah, it's basically indirect emissions. So like when you're producing that car, you have you know, you're using energy, you're using rubber, you're using steel, and all the inputs all have their own emissions that are outside of the direct control of that that producer, but can be controlled by where they source their materials. Or you know, when we're talking about a fossil fuel company, what happens after a company buys that fossil fuel and then uses it? Where do those emissions get tracked? So those are scope 3. Scope 3 are notoriously the hardest emissions to bring down. So we're trying to track those separately so people can see how we're doing with scope 1 and 2, which are easier, and scope 3, which are more difficult. Because we want people to know how we're dealing with not just the easy stuff, but the hard stuff. We also have here tracking our investments in climate solutions. We have from 2022, 5.6 billion. We haven't updated this yet because we don't have the final numbers yet, but we are excited to update this with a pretty significant jump pretty soon. Can't say the number yet until we release it publicly, but just going to tease that there. That's it's a nice jump that we put forward pretty recently, which we will be updating very soon. But yeah, this tracks where we're going. So we have committed $50 billion in climate solutions. Basically, we believe it's not enough to divest from fossil fuels. We want to be proactive. We want to make sure that we're actively investing in where our future economy will be. And that future economy is a green economy. So we're trying to prudently manage things in a way that we're directly investing in our future economy, in that future energy system as well. And make sure that we're investing in those climate solutions that are here to stay, because we're going to need climate solutions for the next many decades. So we have invested, we've committed to $50 billion by 2035. And we have our intern targets here, so you can track and you can follow along with us year over year and see how we're doing. And this is just our tracker to see how we're doing in total. Next up, resiliency. One of the big ways that we will deal with climate change in our city is by dealing with some of the environmental impacts of climate change. The biggest one, of course, floods. Gonna zoom in again. Actually, I'm gonna zoom out a little bit so you can see Queens as well. So what we're doing here is we're showing people how flooding will impact our city for the years to come. So this is the current 100-year floodplain. If you live in this floodplain, every year you have a 1% chance that your area will be flooded. But this is not stationary. We all know that our seas are rising. As our seas rise, our floodplain is going to expand out further and further. So we have projections for what our future floodplain will look like. So this is what our floodplain looks like right now. You can see around this area, there's some areas around the side that are in that plane. It's a lot of Queens, a lot of Coney Island and Brighton Beach, a lot of Staten Island, a lot of Red Hook, a lot of the east side of New York. I live up in Greenpoint here, and not my house is not yet underwater, which is good. But let's take a look at the 2050s and what that's going to look like for our city. You can see that pretty good amount of expansion happens with our 100-year floodplain. What that means is that we have expanded areas that are at risk of flooding, and places that are closer in have more than a 1% chance of flooding every year. They become 30-year floodplains or 5-year floodplains. Now let's take a look at 2080. It's a good amount more encroaching in. And we can take that all the way to 2100. 2100, we see a whole lot of southern Brooklyn encapsulated by water. Whole lot of Queens. My apartment is very underwater at this point. So question is, of course, what are we doing about this? So in these floodplains, what we're doing is we're building resiliency projects. We keep track of the different resiliency projects that we have as a city. These are just their city projects. These are not federal projects. I'm sure you're all familiar with some of the larger, what's called federal projects that are happening in our city. These are the local ones. So we're showing you kind of where these are being built, so you can take a look here. And you can also click on them. And when you click on them, you get more information about what they are. You can see the managing agency. You can see when they started. You can see when they're planning to finish. You can see more information about project ID. You can see some other stuff like flood elevation, and you can see other details about these projects. So you can not just know where these projects are, you can learn about them. Let's see this one over here. This one, for instance, is a Sandy Phase 2 resurfacing. So it's part of, say, it ended a couple years ago. That was done by the Department of Design and Construction. You can see, sorry, you can see other stuff around here as well. And you can also see how sea level rise is going to impact our areas. So let's turn off floodplain. So sea level rise is just going to be basically what high tide looks like over the course of the years. So this is what high tide looks like right now. High tide sometimes will, penetrate into these areas that are currently highlighted. Parts of Queens are often underwater. Part of the edges around these areas, sometimes the docks over here. Let's look at the 2050s. 2050s, we're seeing a little bit more magenta. See a lot more encroaching over here, a lot more on the coasts. 2080s, you start seeing lots of Coney Island going under. And then by 2100, we see a lot of areas over here, a lot of Staten Island, a lot of Queens, a lot of southern Brooklyn, a lot of Red Hook, a lot of Lower East Side. All will be facing regular flooding, which is why these infrastructure resiliency projects are super important. And once again, we do have this environmental justice layer, so you can compare where we're investing, where we're flooding, and you can compare them to these social justice factors. Heat risk. We also track heat risk. So we track a couple of different things here. We treat heat vulnerability index. This is actually the map I showed you earlier in the training. You can see by community district where you can see the heat vulnerability score of each of these neighborhoods. And we have them gradiated so you can see which ones are more heat sensitive than other areas. You also look at vegetative cover. This is where we have things like trees, shrubbery, and other kinds of things that shield us from heat. If you actually, what's interesting is you can actually like toggle these on and off, and you see the direct relationship between vegetative cover and heat vulnerability. You can also see that with environmental justice areas. It shows you a pattern, which is a very concerning pattern. We also do list cool-it sites. Now, cool-it sites are basically different kinds of ways. These are not cooling centers. I want to specify these are not cooling centers. We don't have a map of cooling centers. Those actually change every time there's a heat emergency. But these are cool-it sites which you can plan around. Cool-it sites are basically anything that's like a cooling feature around our city, from drinking fountains, spray showers, cooling sites, anywhere that can bring down your temperature. Like, there's like playgrounds that have play fountains. Those would be an example of a cool-it sites, places you can bring your family on a hot day to cool off that are public. For instance, like you can click on this one and you can see this is in a playground. Good place to bring your kids if it gets really hot out. There's a drinking fountain here, so you can get some water there too. A lot of drinking fountains are in this area. Trying to find a, yeah. So you can actually like track them all. It's like there's a lot of fountains in the area. You can actually see specifically what kinds of things are in the area. You can toggle off by like spray showers. So these are areas you can go walk by to get a nice cooling mist in the day. Now, stormwater and flash flood risk. We have a few different things here you can toggle on and off. So let's look at flooding scenarios. We all know that with climate change, we're going to be seeing more rain. We have an issue that we're dealing with more and more in our city, a thing called microbursts, which are areas of intense rain that happen in small areas that can overflow our current wastewater infrastructure. So it causes flooding. So we're mapping moderate stormwater flood risk, what that looks like in areas, and extreme flood risk. So these are areas that are can be flooded on extreme days. So you can look at these. Let's look at extreme stormwater watch, and let's look at capital projects. So these are areas where the DEP is currently investing in significant infrastructure to move water. These are things like sewer pipe upgrades, different ways to like store water, things that are large projects that are like year-to-year capital projects. You can like click on them and see more information about them as well. You can see that this is a multi-decade investment over here. And this one is a smaller one, trench restoration. And we have, we also show, let me turn this off because this is a very intense map. This is DEP green infrastructure. Now, green infrastructure map is pretty cool. You can see where DEP is putting out different kinds of above ground flood mitigation infrastructure. This is things like bioswales, different things that can take water and hold that on the surface or pull that into our ground, and other kinds of ways that can take water and either store it, hold it, or let it seep into our grounds. And what that allows for is natural ways to either hold or evaporate water without depending on our current infrastructure. So you can click on these, and you can see what they are. You can see this is, for instance, the one I clicked on over here is an infiltration basin. It's one on the side of the neighborhood over here. This is a rain garden, so a bioswale. Now, people often ask like why these areas are concentrated. There's a couple different reasons. One of the reasons is that they do target areas that have the worst flooding first, and this is a long-term project. Ideally, we're going to continue building more and more of these and build them out more and more into larger systems of rainwater infrastructure. Another thing is like some areas just aren't suited for it. Some areas just don't have absorbent ground, or they're on a poor area for drainage, or other kinds of issues that restrict their ability to be a good candidate for some of this infrastructure. But never hurts to still look around you, see what's around your area, and see what can be built around your area. So you can have an idea of when you want to talk to DEP, you can ask them about specific kinds of infrastructure and specific things that may be a better fit for your neighborhood. And you can see where they're being built, and you can take a look and you can check them out, and you can compare them to your own neighborhood. And of course, we also have the environmental justice layer here, so you can compare. And we have a couple different things. We're actually working on building this out to be a little bit more robust. This is our community preparedness section. Just gives you a couple different resources about how to do disaster planning, continuing operation planning. Gives you a little bit of tools so you can understand a little bit about how to plan for natural disasters. And as I mentioned, we are going to have another slide up here, which is going to be environmental quality. Environmental quality is going to track land, sea, and air. Air quality, I'm sure, is on the top of all of your minds right now after what we experienced this past week. Basically, we're going to be able to track, basically, it's like a map of where different pollutants impact our city most. And there are going to be a series of heat maps that show you where particulate matter or ozone or nitrogen oxides tend to collect in our city. We're also going to have things like for land, brownfield sites and brownfield mitigation and statuses of local mitigation. As far as sea goes, it's not so much sea as it is water quality. We're going to have things like a lead pipe map, so you can see what buildings around you have lead pipes. We haven't been building lead pipes since 1985, but we still want people to know that they're still very much in the ground all over our city, and we want people to know if their building is one of those buildings. We also will have a geographical, what's called a representation of. So the DEP has little areas around our city that they check for things like turbidity and water quality issues. You're going to be able to look at your local sampling site for the DEP, click on that, and see what its most recent reading was. This way you can see if there's been any issues with various water quality measurements in your neighborhood. And last but not least, a fun one, the feedback forum. This is a feedback forum. If you have any ideas of how we can improve this dashboard or ways that we can make it better, we're trying to continuously make this better. This forum goes directly to me and my supervisor here. I'm largely I'm largely tasked with consistently developing this project. Every time you put feedback in, it makes my job easier because it tells me what you need. And if you tell me what you need, especially if you have information or open data portals about where that information is and how you want to see it represented, makes it easier to update this thing to make it better consistently. And that's it. Any questions? Richard.
I just want to say how impressive it is. And I'm looking forward to diving into that. I'm a data person, so I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm glad you're looking forward to it. If you have any ideas that come from it, please reach out to me. Let me know.
Will do. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
I see Richard's got his hand up.
Yep. Hi, Richard.
Hey, just a silly one. How often is this updated? Like, there's a lot of data sets here. How do you stay on top of that? Is it just like twice a year? Or is it like every time something's released?
So our goal is to make sure that it's updated completely every year, every Earth Day, every year. Appropriate day to do it. But we do update data as we continuously improve the site. So sometimes things get updated more regularly. On the below, it's called, you should be able to see when we last updated everything. When you look at the data, if you look at the sources, or we'll have it labeled. So you'll always know when the data is from.
Great, thanks. And you did a great job with everything. So keep it up.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, also as someone who like builds graphical interfaces off of OpenNYC data, this was really well done.
Very cool. I don't want to take credit for the actual like design of it. I just do the data, and I tell what's it called, our data processing people and our graphic design people here what to do, and they're great at their jobs.
Danny, you are muted.
Sorry about that. So I was just curious if you guys have shared this tool with any other community boards, either in Brooklyn or elsewhere, and if you have any insights on like how they've used it. Agree, it's really cool, but would love to give it some more practical use in this committee and in others too.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. Actually, no, we have not. This is actually the first community board we brought it to. We bring it mostly to community groups, activist groups, legacy environmental groups, civic groups. I was actually in Bay Ridge last week with a women's advocacy group that wanted to learn more about climate issues. Yeah, we've done this in various kinds of groups, but this is the first time we're doing it at a community board meeting. So, any feedback about how we can fine tune the training to target community boards more, please let me know.
Great. We will definitely, I'm sure we'll have feedback. So that's great. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I really appreciate it. I know personally, like I said, I'll be taking a look periodically.
Cool. Yeah, looking forward to all your feedback, and thank you all for tuning in here.
Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
inviting me.
Thanks so much.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. And then next up, we have the DSNY rule change impacting placement of refuse for commercial businesses in containers.
Yes.
All right. Should I, let me bring up that PowerPoint.
If you could, please. Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Give me one moment. All right. This should be, can you guys see the this slide deck here?
Yep, we can see it.
Is that working all right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, great.
Okay. So what is the easiest way to do this for you?
If you want to just say slide advance, if you want to handle the presentation, Tracy, do you want to?
Actually, if you want to go ahead, I might interject, but you are in control of the slide, so it might be easier.
Absolutely. All right. So I'm just going to kind of read it out because obviously I didn't put it together, but so bear with me. But the big thing is that we are New York City, the DSNY is considering changing over how it deals with commercial receptacles. If anyone kind of lived through the 90s in Brooklyn and Bay Ridge, dumpsters, that kind of thing, how carting companies get rid of commercial refuse. So there will be a hearing that'll take place on June 22nd via WebEx at 10 a.m. that the DSNY will be running for feedback. So anyone who's watching in from the public, this is where you can give them their direct feedback if you have any concerns about this. The current rules allow for commercial establishments to set out waste. I'm kind of just reading off of the deck here, but set out waste and recycling materials within 1 hour of closing. provided that the scheduled collection occurs before the establishment next opens for business, and only if such materials are placed out for collection with tight-fitting lids. Those establishments that place materials out for collection in bags, regardless of the time, can place it no later than 8 p.m. So very similar to how the new rule changes happen for residential. After a certain time period, you can set it out in bags. So the new proposed change is predominantly to get rid of rat infestations in the city. Seems to be the driving motive for this. Food-related businesses are large generators of that kind of waste. And these are the main changes. All food-related businesses must set out any putrescible solid waste, I think I'm getting that right, including refuse and organic waste at the curb for private carter collection in rigid receptacles with tight-fitting lids. Doesn't apply to organic waste, recycling materials except organic waste. And basically, I believe that there is no bag, but they eliminated that bag component, essentially is what you're looking at here. They also set forth maintenance and storage requirements for those rigid receptacles. So if other storage areas on the premises are not available, receptacles may be stored in an area within 3 feet of the building line on the sidewalk, provided that such receptacles are maintained in an orderly manner and do not impede and obstruct the flow of traffic. So essentially, I mean, I'm adding commentary in here as a board member, but essentially a dumpster kind of situation or whatever variation you can buy. So which food-related businesses will now require receptacles? All catering establishments, food wholesalers, retail food stores, and food service establishments, restaurants, etc. So there is a little bit of local history that was put together. So in 2002, 700 Bay Ridge and Dyker Heights residents, they did sign a petition requesting the implementation of what's called Operation Dumpster. This was, a kind of thing against the dumpsters that were on local city streets. They were a mess. They were, smelly, all of the kind of things you would imagine people would not like dumpsters out on main commercial avenues, especially, or around the side streets on residential streets. And that they were overflowing, they were smelly, and really we got a lot of fun history on it. Like letters out to Community Board 10. This was a big kind of like activist-led thing at the time. State Senator Vin Gentile was moving to get a ban on those kind of dumpsters, and moving it out to purely bag waste. And it was successful. They kind of got rid of dumpsters and things like that. They allowed rigid receptacles like heavy plastic bags to be picked up by a private carter. And the district office essentially has been, now that they've announced reverting back to that old rigid receptacle rule, we've gotten quite a few comments from local merchants. 15 merchants responded when we announced those changes. And here are a couple of things that they said. So heavy-duty bags placed neatly on the curb and collected by a private carter within a short period of time is more effective than sealed containers that do require maintenance, that do require, extra time for the carters to pick up, as opposed to just swinging it into a truck. That many larger businesses, some that refrigerate their trash, can't shift from bags to containers due to the limited storage inside and on the sidewalk. And that there should be an allowance for heavy bag storage and collection within a short window, similar to what's allowed under the new rules for large residential apartment buildings. That residential apartment buildings do not have this kind of requirement, only, food service kind of businesses. And here's some examples of containerization. They can be unsightly, if not stored properly, etc. And that was Josephine's presentation she put together, and it's open for the committee to discuss.
Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I mean, I can switch hats.
I think that encouragement of garbage bags, large contractor black garbage bags is kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Mm,
Agreed.
yeah,
I
it
was
seems
thinking about
like-
that as we were going through it.
Yeah, it seems like the thing is they want to maintain the bag usage. This is me putting on my board, my committee member hat, where it's like, all right, I mean, I get like bags are also going to cause smelliness, but I get that like a garbage container can gather that smell over time. It gathers like they just deployed on Fifth Avenue like the new like, you know, receptacles where they can store an extra set of trash before pickup on Fifth Avenue, and those can I've seen on like in Times Square, those things leak, they smell, and then it gathers. As
Yeah,
opposed
they-
to a trash bag, I understand like a trash bag can like eventually rain can just wipe that permanently away, as opposed to a container which gathers. But ugh,
Well,
I get
I
where they're
think-
coming from.
Yeah, and I think one of the main things is it's not necessarily a solve for the rat and vermin issue.
It really isn't.
And it is, I feel like it's a step back. And it absolutely contradicts what the whole Operation Dumpster was, is to clean up the sidewalks, quality of life, don't have the dripping, smelly dumpsters sitting, you know, on the sidewalks as you're walking by. But more importantly as well is the vermin and the rats. So it's not, I don't believe that it would be solving that issue.
No. Yeah, and especially if they were leaving it to the individual businesses to maintain and provide for that, like there's going to be such a wide variety of like receptacles that you're surely rats are going to get into some of them. Like
Right.
not everyone's going to buy the most expensive, fanciest airtight container.
Right.
And that's what a lot of these merchants are saying is like, hey, I don't have the space to put this out. Some places might not have places that would obstruct traffic, and a lot of them are getting their stuff picked up within a few hours with the carting companies. And I remember that weren't they and they haven't done this yet, but they were supposed to streamline the carting companies for a while now.
I was just thinking about that. Like we talked about that probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was thinking
Yeah.
today that I wasn't sure if it had been implemented because they were reducing the amount of carting companies that could actually come into an area.
Yeah, in
So-
order to make that pickup more efficient.
Correct. I'll have to look into that and see where they are on that because I feel like it was supposed to be coming soon-ish.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think
it's
I don't think it ever came
No,
through. I
it's
could be
been
wrong on that.
delayed. It's the commercial waste zone laws. They're
Yeah.
on the books, but they haven't been implemented yet.
Okay.
And I'm also, in case anyone's unaware, I am speaking as a member of I work for the Department of Sanitation. So just putting that out there. I am in favor of this containerization, just, you know, in general, just because even if it's not a perfect system, which I realize it's not, you know, given all the reasons you've said, containerization still does make it more difficult for, you know, rodents to access food
Mhm.
waste. Bare minimum, I think part of the pushback on this is likely like, this is just me, you know, thinking, but it might have to do with maybe costs for businesses will go up because if you have bags out on a curb, it's tough
Mhm.
for a commercial carter to charge you a certain amount because it's not in a container. If it's in a container, you're paying, you know, that price for that container. It's just easier to put that price on it instead of like a sort of more amorphous, less quantifiable amount is sort of my thought behind it. And yeah, obviously paying for and maintaining a container is more onerous and costly than just putting bags on the curb. But I think we can all agree that bags on the curb are still unsightly, still produce smells, still attract rodents. So
Yeah. Liz.
Yes, hello, fellow board members. I am the interim executive director of the Fifth Avenue bid. So I got feedback about this new proposed rule from merchants, and honestly, they are not happy about it. You know, the carting companies, they do come late, so there's like about 3-hour gap between when they have to put it out and then when the carter collects it. And also, it's not so much the issue about the food establishments, it's more of the residential garbage that's on corners, right? I mean, luckily we have those new city bins, so we could store some of it, but it's just too much and it's too overwhelming. And, you know, not to mention like small businesses, the food establishments, they're still trying to bounce back from COVID. So it's another added cost to them to buy these containers, and then they could get stolen or damaged, and then they have to keep buying and buying and buying.
I'm just gonna scroll up so we have the requirements here on the screen for us. Yeah.
I guess I have a question as well, is I'm not sure why I understand why the food establishments have different regulations when residential waste is just as much of a problem. And they are allowed to put it out at a certain time, and then there's a certain time period before it's picked up. Why are the food services having a completely different rule? Like, what is I'm not sure if I understand why.
Part of me thinks, and this is just gonna think just in terms of quantity of waste generated, right? Like waste after a standard restaurant day is every day a large amount, possibly. And on pickup days that probably like really surpasses, and it's probably more pungent because they make a point of like, putrescent waste or putrescible, like stuff that's actively rotting as opposed to maybe stuff that's just like dinner waste or something like that. And then I guess they are pushing for organics again, right? So that is containerization right there on the residential side, which is, put them in those, airtight sealable containers. So I mean, I am in favor of containerization. It's just, having the city assist in getting that stuff placed for businesses to not just be like, do it yourself and we'll fine you if you do it wrong, which is usually how a lot of the regulations go. Both having good enforcement, yes, but also assistance in, deploying this and creating space for these containers to exist in areas where a business can't fulfill the requirements.
Well, I mean, I think that we should urge that there be an ability for these commercial establishments to have an option.
Yeah, I
so
guess
that they, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
Oh yeah, no, I was just thinking like, I think they do have the option right now, but what they're doing is they're kind of eliminating it and saying, no, but maybe if there's something about like, how can you guarantee how quickly these bags are getting picked up? Because a lot of from what I'm gathering from what all of merchants are saying, is like, hey, our stuff gets picked up within 3 hours. Like, right. how and again, if it's like about rat infestation, like I get it, even within 3 hours, but then again, that's a lot of residential waste as well. I do agree with containerization as a whole. It's just that I'd like to see a little bit more support from the city getting it implemented. Yeah. I know that other cities like actually like take parking space away, and they have like, a streets containerization is like city maintained as like a drop-off point, right? Maybe working that into the fact that those waste zones for carting companies hasn't been implemented yet.
Right. I mean, do we want to, propose to send a letter as far as like to DSNY, just asking to reconsider that there is the option of putting it out and having it collected in that 3-hour window?
Yeah, or at least like looking at the like, looking at the carting zones laws and how this could interact with that and provide some relief for small businesses that genuinely are struggling versus, like on another level, like large, like, catering halls or something that are like producing tons of trash every night and have tons of square footage and indoor space. I'm more like, oh, absolutely containerize that, right?
Right.
So there's also variations in that.
Yeah, so if I can interject, there is a commercial organics law that is on the books, and what that did was it sort of did what you guys are talking about, is it required the largest producers to adapt first, and it gave more time for those smaller producers, and it's still sort of rationing that down to get to those folks. So like the big food wholesalers, stores with over a certain square footage or number of locations, it kind of hit them first, and it's working its way down to like a mom and pop. So there is precedent for something like that to not be applied universally at the onset, but rather sort of tapered over time.
Yeah, and I feel like that might create an ecosystem of these containers, getting tried out by the public. It takes, iterations on developing and manufacturing, on scale containers that won't smell and can be cleaned easily and are tight against rats, and maybe putting the larger businesses and the worst offenders on that list first. I think that's a good letter to send. Is like, please scale this, just don't change the law, but implement a phased process to assist with it, so you can have the best possible version of it when they get deployed. But also we should absolutely, I think, send the comments that were directly received by us from local merchants as well, just in
Agreed.
case they can't attend that WebEx meeting.
Okay, Dan, can you give me the bullet points? I'm just trying to
Yeah.
think of like putting this into a motion.
Yeah, so let's say that a motion to send a response to the DSNY regarding their, proposed containerization changes, that maybe we would propose, some kind of a phased implementation of the law. Because right now they have multiple different types of groups that are being targeted. And maybe have, smaller restaurants and smaller food service places and wholesalers, there it is, catering establishments, food wholesalers, retail food stores, and food service establishments, to phase that in terms of their predicted or expected or perceived load on the system.
Yeah, it's a very broad list.
Yeah, and to have some kind of phased implementation where the larger ones will be, subject to this first, that have the capacity to really do it, and then slowly phase it in as our recommendation, or that would accommodate what we as a committee would like to see, but also bullet point 2, include all of the merchants' direct feedback in case they can't attend, just so they have that data for them.
Okay, so the motion would be to send them a letter,
Phased.
acknowledging that, I'm looking at my notes, that they have a commitment to clean up the city and, and deal with the rats, and the refuse. But they should take into consideration small businesses that they may want to consider a phased implementation to allow businesses to adapt. And that we include the information from the merchants, for the local merchants.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That would
okay.
be, if anyone
Is
wants
everyone,
to amend or
any have amendments or no? Okay, I guess we'll just call the vote. So all in favor?
I forgot I have to watch
You
that.
have to.
I'm in charge of that. Everyone raise their hand who would be in favor. All right, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, and Richard. All right.
Yeah, I'm a recusal.
Okay,
Recusal?
great. So I
Any
guess that would be
abstentions?
1, 2, 3, 4. So that's 5 in favor, 1 recusal. Any abstentions? All right. That would pass.
Okay, great. I will be quickly writing up my report for Thursday. That'll be a very quick turnaround. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Unless anyone has any new business or anything that they wanted to bring up for the environmental committee, I think we can adjourn.
It sort of came up here, but just a note, there was a suite of environmental bills that was passed earlier or last
Ooh.
week. Sorry, time flies. And that included mandatory organic or mandatory curbside composting, mandatory citywide curbside composting.
Hey.
Blah. So just want to put that out there. You know, the next time we meet, someone will probably be talking about it from SNY. But it's exciting, and
That is great.
it's matching the existing timeline essentially, so it doesn't speed anything up for us as a community board in terms of timeline. But it, you know, just putting that out there, I'm excited about it.
That's excellent. That's great news. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate your
right.
time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, everyone.
you
Have
all have a good evening.
great evening. Take care.